Austria's forests are among her most valuable natural resources. They are managed sustainably. In other words, no more timber is removed than will regenerate naturally. This principle has confronted the forest manager since the early days of industrial forestry with the key problem: how much timber is there in my stand? Before felling, i.e. timber harvesting, begins, the forest manager must be able to determine how much timber accrues annually. A crude estimate can be made using ingeniously devised tables. To obtain more accurate data, one would have to measure each individual tree to determine the timber volume in, say, cubic meters, summing to obtain the so-called growing stock. This would, however, take far too long and would also be too expensive. Thus, it was necessary to find an appropriate sampling method that would allow a reliable estimate of the entire stand to be made. It was this problem that attracted the attention of Walter Bitterlich, and in 1931 he began to develop his pioneering invention. The first ideas for a new measuring technique that finally led to the angle count sampling method came to me very early, as a graduate of what is now the Universität für Bodenkultur, Vienna, in 1931, during my first period of forestry practice. It seemed a pity to have to spend so much time measuring trees, and so I began to think about ways of making forest inventories more efficient. Despite manifold other tasks and a forced interruption occasioned by World War II, Walter Bitterlich did not allow himself to be diverted from developing his original idea. It was in 1948 that his idea for angle count sampling was first published. Because of its efficiency and simplicity in use, the idea spread like wildfire around the globe. Bitterlich employed the principles of geometry in a masterly fashion. Using a simplifying assumption, trees in a forest can be considered to be cones of different sizes. To apply angle count sampling, an observer in a forest inspects the trees in terms of a specified horizontal angle, termed the critical angle alpha. This angle is defined by having a target of width b attached to a rod of length L held in front of the observer's eye. To determine the sample, the observer rotates and views the trees around the sampling point. Each tree whose trunk is wide enough to exceed the viewing angle at the standard height of 1.3 meters, breast height diameter BHD, is counted in the sample. Trees whose trunk diameters are less than the viewing angle are excluded from the sample. The sampling concept depends on a simple geometric law of proportionality. The ratio of the area of a circle of diameter BHD bears a constant relationship to the area of ground the circle traces out if rotated about the observation point at radius r. Thus, each tree counted relates to a specific circular area of ground, the basal area, related solely to the viewing angle as defined by dimensions b and l. The ratio k, the basal areal density, measured in square meters per hectare, is also termed the basal area factor. Thus, each tree counted, irrespective of its breast height diameter, represents the identical basal area density. Hence, the total base area density can be determined by multiplying the number of trees included in the sample by the factor k. Building on this concept, Bitterlich began to construct instruments that would simplify timber stand assessment. For example, it was necessary to automate corrections for stands on sloping ground. After several intermediate designs, Bitterlich was able to develop an instrument he termed the Spiegelrelascope, mirror relescope, that became famous worldwide. In 1950, Bitterlich began to seek a company that would manufacture his device. Though well aware of the significance of his invention, he had no capital to finance production. The company he was seeking would have to take on the costs of developing a prototype, but his inability to assess the size of the market for his invention made this a difficult task. He eventually contracted a company that today bears the name Feinmechanische Optische Betriebsgesellschaft mbH, based in Salzburg, Austria, to manufacture and distribute his Spiegelrelascope, and which the company continues to sell worldwide. Irrespective of where one is on the globe, there is hardly a serious forestry operation that does not use one or more of these essential measuring devices. Apart from an enormous improvement in efficiency, important forestry parameters can be assessed with a 90% saving of time relative to other methods in use. The versatility of the Spiegelrelascope is an important factor. In addition to its use for angle count sampling, the device can be used, among other tasks, for slope angle and tree height determinations. It is also used in making other specialized forestry assessments, such as timber volume measurements of trees and stands. In 1967, Walter Bitterlich was appointed Professor of Forest Yield Science at the Universität für Bodenkultur, Vienna. This at last gave him the opportunity to apply himself fully to developing his ideas to advance forestry management. The results of his scientific research are many-sided and have given rise to many improvements and new developments. But Walter Bitterlich remained faithful to his manifold other talents. Creative and artistically inclined, he draws and paints in his free time. In addition to his technical writing, he writes philosophical works. His pioneering inventions have made Walter Bitterlich the best-known forester in the world. The center of his world, and the point from which he has always drawn solace and support in difficult times, is his family.